Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. I have found that people will reveal themselves both in the words that they speak and in the silences they keep, in the notes they play and in the spaces in between those notes, in what they choose to reveal about themselves and what they choose to conceal, in their eagerness, in their apprehension, in their patience, in their enthusiasm. Davie Poe is, in his own words, an enthusiast. He's a dedicated songwriter, dedicated both in the sense that he does it as a regular practice with discipline and focus, and also in the sense that his whole life seems to be dedicated to songcraft. His most recent single, People Clap Hands, came out a few weeks ago.
People clap hands, first the girls, then the boys, hands together. Make a joyful noise. Clap hands, people clap hands. People clap hands.
Talking to Davie Poe, I am reminded that at their best, songwriters are our popular philosophers. Rather than creating a diversion from everyday life, they illuminate the human struggle and elevate the human experience. David is not somebody I knew much about until recently. Maybe I first noticed his name as I prepared to talk to the record producer Larry Klein a few years back. Or maybe it was when I was getting ready to talk to Larry Goldings. Both of those esteemed Larrys have worked with David. In fact, at some point, I remember tweeting that I wished Larry Goldings and Davie Poe had written the songs for Damien Chazelle's movie La La Land. Anyway, I certainly noticed David's name as I prepared to talk to Curtis Stigers a couple of years ago. The two co-wrote the title song to Stigers' most recent record, Gentleman.
There's a way that you look when you're good. There's a way that you look when you're bad. Save your face, pay the rent. Learn to take a compliment with grace. Hit the street, grow the land. When you meet the devil, shake his hand. Be a man, a gentleman.
By the time I spoke to singer-songwriter Duncan Sheik and learned of his multiple collaborations with Davie Poe over the years, it became clear to me that I would have to find David and talk to him. He had already revealed plenty about himself to me in the songs that he wrote and in the way his peers talked about him, and clearly, he keeps very, very good company. When we did end up connecting, his emails to me were so thorough and curious, interested, encouraging, positive. He immediately did a deep dive on me on a level that was almost disconcerting. He listened to my records, numerous episodes of the podcast. He had opinions, he had thoughts, he had questions, which he shared with me and which showed me some things about my own work that I don't think I had fully considered before. But mostly, he led with his enthusiasm. I've never done this before, but I think maybe the best way to do him any real justice before playing the interview is to read you some excerpts from our correspondence. This is what he wrote. Perhaps we share the inclination to write stuff that avoids being sentimental or maudlin, but speaks to the milestone moments. Looking back on it now, it appears my central themes are love, sex, death, family, God, sociopolitics, and modernity, which in print looks like a bunch of merit badges. T-Bone Burnett told me once never to do interviews. He said, once they get you answering the wrong questions, you're sunk. I've mostly followed his advice, and mostly been embarrassed when I haven't. I figure if I put it on the page, I won't have to explain myself. But for once, I would love to get it right. So kindly forgive the overview below, which seems terribly self-serving. Then he laid out his career for me, and I will share some of the highlights with you, a bit reorganized and edited. He told me that he ran sound at CBGB's Gallery for 5 years until he got his first record contract. He wrote that he spent years as the opening act for artists of note such as Tori Amos, Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, the Jayhawks, and Chris Whitley. He told me that and much more. And I share this, I promise, abbreviated rundown of his career achievements with you, because in fact, when we talked, we got into very few of these details. Instead, we had a proper conversation that I think paints the other kind of picture. Not so much a retrospective or a detailed exploration of what he's done, but rather a portrait of how he thinks, how he sees himself, who he is, and why he does what he does. And maybe more than ever before, he showed me how music is a way to travel through the world, to think about the world around me. He showed me that songs are signposts for a life lived. This is one of those conversations that is densely punctuated by pearls of wisdom, nuggets of truth, sobering realities, and flights of fancy too. It is as special and hard to contain as David is himself. Each one of these experiences is a journey into the unknown. As my friend Andre de Shields often describes it, we perch ourselves capriciously on the precipice of the abyss. I try to have no expectations and to meet each person where they are, armed with curiosity and, yes, enthusiasm. Third-story.com is a place to go to sign up, subscribe, get involved, check the archive. Previous episodes come to mind with David's friends and collaborators, including the aforementioned talks with Larry Klein, Larry Goldings, Curtis Stigers, and Duncan Sheik. Then it's patreon.com/thirdstorypodcast. Head over there to help me help you. Here's me and David Poe talking it down.
I am really honored to be part of this effort. I'm an enthusiast of the show. And, when you first asked me to do this, I was like, I wonder if he has the right guy. Just because you've spoken with so many of my colleagues and other people that I respect who are just like killer players, famous producers, songwriters of note, some real talent, and some really interesting exchanges that you've put together there.
I know I have the right David Poe because your name kept coming up. I see this project on some level as just trying to take myself to school every week, and learn something new and put another piece of the puzzle together. And you are clearly a piece of the puzzle that I'm putting together. And I discovered it, whether it was talking to Curtis Stigers or Duncan Sheik or Scrapper or Larry Goldings. I mean, I just kept seeing you. And I admit that you had slipped through the cracks of my awareness for too long. And when I kind of started to realize,
Leo, slipping through the cracks is my career plan.
Yeah, that's what you do. But I said, well, I need to make this right. And so I was so glad that you were responsive. But I don't know much, and I did a little bit of research. You helped me do a little homework before we are talking today. But one thing that you didn't tell me in our exchange is where it all started. I think you came out of Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah.
Dayton, Ohio, I don't know much about it, but I do know that it is considered by many to be like the home of the funk, that it's a very funky town.
There's a funk museum in Dayton, Ohio, and Sugarfoot Bonner from the Ohio Players used to come down to our gigs in the Oregon district, which is the strip of bars adjacent to downtown Dayton. I remember at one point he sat in, this is when I was in my 16-year-old band. He sat in on the guitar player's amplifier. He tweaked the EQ to make it funky, and dude just kept that EQ. It was like a PV amp or whatever, and he kept that EQ throughout. I mean, the chronology is born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, kind of the quintessential college town, came to Dayton, Ohio. My parents were both educators. My dad sort of helped foment the modern community college concept. My mom was a human rights advocate, also an educator, a music teacher by trade, advocate for women, the poor, peace, arts and education, civil rights advocate, long time. Both of them were advocates for equity in the underserved. So had a bunch of bands there.
Were they into you playing music? Were they worried about you? A couple of straight edge educators, were they concerned about a life of uncertainty and being nomadic? What did they say?
The simple answer is yes. But I will say that they were also very supportive. And one of the things that I think helped enable that support was when I was 16, I was playing the bars. They trusted me to do that. They probably also knew there was no stopping me. And, you know, we won this talent competition. We won 10 free hours of studio time at a real recording studio owned by the son of the guy who had held the patent on the pop top on, you know, pop cans, soda cans as they're known outside of the Midwest.
Yeah, Midwest, yeah.
And we went in and we cut a single and it came out and it got on the radio and it was a hit. And so, you know, there was nothing better than having a song on the radio when you're a senior in high school. It definitely turned my fortunes considerably. And, I remember specifically, you're talking about time, how old I was. This really dates me. I had a paper route. Leo, this is before your time, but there used to be these things called newspapers. They were printed on paper, which is a very thin piece of tree. Anyway, so I would get my dog and I would go out and deliver the paper out. And then, you know, you go collect the money. And then I went down to Ace Music and bought a flanger or whatever I wanted. And we played a gig at this horrible roadhouse place where we played. You would have loved it. And this also dates me. This was at a time when people paid for music. So it was $2 to get in, $1 to the house, $1 to the band. I come home from this insanely huge gig with $1,001 bills in my pocket. The Sunday papers are stacked up on my parents' porch. I grab my dog. I go out and deliver the papers, called the newspaper, quit, then went down to Ace Music and bought this guitar, actually, this red Telly that I've got right here. You know, it was just like all things seemed possible. We were playing festivals. We were making money. I went to school, played in bands all through school. You know, it was sort of like we were getting feedback from the other world. It wasn't just some like ridiculous dream. We were actually had some things happening. So they were supportive.
You just need that one little piece of feedback to keep you going, right? The one great gig and you're off and running. But what's the name of the song? What was the song that was your first little hit?
The song was called Conversation.
Man, when I was 16 years old, Steve Miller recorded 4 of my songs.
Oh my God.
One of them was called Conversation.
No kidding. Wild. That's far out. What? That's unbelievable. What we're talking about here, or at least an ancillary topic, is enthusiasm. And I remember T-Bone said to me once, T-Bone Burnett, who produced my first record, said, enthusiasm works wonders, but to falsify enthusiasm is a sin. And, you know, I learned a lot from that guy. And it has to be said that, like, there's maybe, because of his imprimatur and in his own excellent songs in his career, there's maybe no one whose enthusiasm means more than him. Yeah. At least to me and a lot of the people that work with him. But I love the fact that he was saying, like, you can't just be a cheerleader for everything. Yeah. And I remember him also saying, with every song, iPhone demo or when they're tracking it, he listens really hard for something that he loves. And he talked about loving a song into life, into being, which I think about all the time, because every song that I hear, all of them, almost all of them, have something about them that is cool. There's a great lyric, there's a hook, there's a cool sound, drum fill, whatever, there's something there. There is an ember in every song that can be fanned into a flame. If you love it enough. And if you can locate that thing.
I think love is at the heart of it. And enthusiasm, I think, is absolutely, you lead with the word. When I reached out to you about doing this interview, you said, I'm an enthusiast. That's clearly something that is powering you, that's motivating you. And not only can it not be faked, or it can be faked, but it's a sin, I guess, what T-Bone says. But I often wonder if it can be taught, because it turns out it's a pretty crazy thing to do with your life. Yes. To devote it to writing songs and living in songs.
Yeah, agreed. I suppose it is crazy. There are forks in the road. For me, one of the forks in the road, and part of the reason I'm really grateful to have had some early success and to have gotten positive feedback, and also to have done so before the internet revealed all my youthful choices, is that I got a lot of that stuff, a lot of the silliness, maybe some of the egotism, some of the missteps. I got a lot of that out of my system fairly early on. And by the time I arrived in New York and started to see what was happening there, that was a fork in the road for me, where I realized that I was far more interested in the arty part and the crafty part, musical part, than all of the adjacent music industry stuff. Almost developed a disdain for a lot of that, probably to my detriment. But it seemed so self-serving. I was just embarrassed by it for my own thing. Frankly, I still am. And if your work wasn't so excellent, I probably wouldn't be here right now, because it always just seems so self-serving on some level.
I mean, for what it's worth, I really go out of my way not to walk into these conversations as a form of promotion as such. I mean,
Clearly.
I'm really interested in the story and the journey and as I may have said to you, that intersection. I mean, what I think is so interesting is what happens in our lives and what work we make out of it, where those touch, that's underneath it, I think, is what's kind of motivating this.
And the other thing is, and what I'm starting to understand now as a songwriter of a certain age who is, really got one foot deeply rooted in the analog period and another squarely planted in the digital, pre and post internet, magnetic tape to Pro Tools. What I'm realizing is that a lot of young players and writers haven't had the arts education, the cover bands, the choirs, the ability to go and play a bar when you're 16 and then be in chemistry class at 8 a.m., which happened to me a lot, or to play the Christmas dance for the school or whatever. A lot of people just haven't had those experiences. And why would they? But all of those things, all of those tryouts, all of those things that you do where the end game is not to make a TikTok video, but to make a song for your band, or make a song that sounds like your heroes, or to master the chord progression, or the, solo from Stairway to Heaven, whatever people are into. And they just haven't had those experiences. So I kind of feel a bit of responsibility for sharing some of the fundaments, especially in the co-writes that I do. I work with a lot of 20-year-old writers, and they all sing like birds, and they're very beautiful. Some of them are excellent dancers. A lot of them don't yet have a mastery, for lack of a better term. They haven't developed a language on an instrument, if at all. They haven't had that analysis of pop music that allows them to think about how they're going to situate their own voice on that vast continuum. What color in the mosaic are they going to be, or colors,
When you say situate your voice, I think that can be read in a few ways. And one of them is, what do I sound like when I sing, and what style am I singing in, or whatever. But I think the other is maybe the larger one, which is what do I contribute here? If I'm going to make something, is it adding to the tapestry? Have I left things a little bit changed? Which is, it's a huge thing to ask when you write songs. But I think that on a certain level, that is kind of what we're doing, is we're trying to leave things a little bit different than they were when we showed up.
At the very least, to carry the torch of quality, of eternal themes, and to put a spin on it that is modern, because, that is the gig. And not to get on a soapbox, but, and yet I feel that I must. culture that declares art to be disposable will get disposable art. And a generation that is unable to discern between fact from opinion, or a good song from a bad song, or art from performance art, or performance art from politics, is soon going to be unable to discern between right and wrong. I worry about that in the now, and I think culturally speaking, I hope that we shake free from the last couple of years. I have to believe that we will. For music, I think about how there's a difference between art and entertainment. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean to suggest that one is greater than the other, or that art can't be entertaining, or that entertainment can't be arty. But there is a difference. And the Venn diagram of art and entertainment, where the two circles come together, the overlapping part, that's the great pop. Stuff that is populist and timely and appealing, where both the words and the melody are hooky and thoughtful, and the arrangement is both cool and crafty. And I hear a lot of contemporary music that seems made for people who don't like music. I see a cultural adaptation to mediocrity and a capitulation to the same 10 songs that everybody knows and nobody loves. And I say to myself, don't hate fun. Don't hate fun. You know, that is not my brand. There's always been silly music that lacks ambition or meaning. And it's always been tough for an artist, and celebrity and beauty and shock value have always been used to sell music. That stuff is not new. The internet is new, and it is unprecedented. And its interaction with music is something we need to face. You know, internet curating has trained a lot of listeners to tolerate what we used to call muzak, meaning music that is a soundtrack for another activity, something to fill the space, music to talk over, music to evoke a vague feeling. And usually people want to feel good. So, despite our ever-changing world, despite the beginnings and endings of wars and presidencies, despite the pandemic, despite climate change, despite systemic racism, many people are seeking this music that describes anything but those realities. Music without a conscience, or poetry, or meaning, or even conveying a real emotion. And that is a rejection of the idea that music is a reflection of the time in which it's created. You know, this is music that reacts to its time, but, you know, reacts like the child of an abusive parent who learns to be a peacemaker or learns to be cute.
I would say yes or, you know, in the 30s, if you look at the music and the film that came out of the Depression, it was also escapism. And
yes.
It's like there's also this tendency to polish everything around you and pretend that the ugliness isn't happening. It's a distraction from it. So, you know, it may be in our nature to do that, or that may be just another example 100 years later of the American response to commodify something and sell an alternative, a shiny alternative to what's really happening.
Agreed. And also, like I said, I don't want to hate fun. However, you know, the music of the 30s is an interesting example, because the two songs that stand out to me from that era, 20s into 30s, two of the songs that have stood the test of time. Number one, the definitive ballad of that period, which is Yip Harburg's Brother, Can You Spare a Dime?
Once I built a railroad, I made it run, made it race against time. Once I built a railroad, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Once I built a tower up to the sun, brick and rivet and lime. Once I built a tower, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime?
When we talk about Through the Hindsight historical lens, that is the one song that perhaps defines that era. The other one is Forget Your Troubles, Come On, Get Happy, Get Ready for the Judgment Day.
Forget your troubles, come on, get happy. You better chase all your cares away. Shout hallelujah, come on, get happy. Get ready for the judgment day. The sun is shining, come on, get happy. The Lord is waiting to take your hand. Shout hallelujah, come on, get happy. We're going to the promised land.
That's a different trip, right? I always say the best songs carry a dagger in the boot. Get ready for the judgment day. That kind of perspective, you know, that's very specific, right? Like, be happy, but you know, you shall be judged.
Yeah.
And
oh yeah.
I'm not just talking about the quality of the lyrics in these songs. A lot of those tunes are hooky as hell.
Yeah.
You know, this is not a diary entry set to a drum loop with two adjacent notes or maybe one going
Right.
ad infinitum.
Well, no, and actually, Get Happy is a Trojan horse for a much deeper idea. You know what I mean? It marches it in with a very major kind of upbeat, bouncy thing, but absolutely underneath it is the dagger. I mean, it's like once they get through the gates, you know, they unleash the the brutality, if you really think about what's going on in that song.
Yeah.
But I also want to ask you about this question of the internet, because, you know, you have played it on both ends at this point. You came through the record business system, the record label system, got signed, and I imagine that there were moments in your career where you thought, I'm one radio single away from a totally different life. It's so easy when that doesn't totally connect to blame the business and think, well, the business let me down. I mean, I don't know. I want to hear your version of the story. I want to hear what you went through. But there was this moment when the internet was kind of equalizing everything where we thought, well, great, now it's up to the people. You know, now we can leave it in the hands of the listeners, and we no longer have these arbiters, these gatekeepers who are going to decide what lives and what dies. And here we are now lamenting 20 years on the sort of loss of the gatekeepers, flawed as the system may have been. The alternative is like actually more chaotic and maybe breeds more mediocrity.
Indeed. Although I think there is more amazing music being made now than maybe ever in history. And as the kid who used to take his paper route money and go down to the weird indie record store and buy whatever, you know, the like rude clerk recommended, or my sister, or something that I had heard about, I absolutely love streaming. Streaming is amazing. Yeah. However, the business model of streaming is predicated on income inequality. On Spotify, it takes millions of streams for an artist to make US minimum wage. The average Spotify employee makes $14,000 a month. YouTube is worse. And American radio has never paid recording artists. We're the only democracy that does that, by the way. You know, you've toured Europe, so you know this. You fill out your PRS sheet. So these entities who rely on music as their primary profit driver don't credibly pay the workers who make their core offering, the music makers. And on most streaming companies, a song is worth a fraction of a penny. It used to be put another nickel in the Nickelodeon. All I want is having you and music we've regressed from paying 5 cents for a song. Now we're debating, what fraction, what thousandth of a penny a song is worth. It's a good question for everyone to ask themselves, what is a song worth? But if you're talking about it in terms of thousands of pennies, that's simply wrong. It's just objectively wrong. Not even they can defend it. And here's where I'm coming from. It's the dough.
Yeah.
But it's also that what this business practice has done, besides make a handful of people very rich, is that we've created a generation of music makers who don't even know that they're supposed to be paid for their work, or they will create music they think will get them paid, which means conformist, or we get a cohort of affluent artists, the children of millionaires, child stars, because they're the ones who can afford to do it. The children of millionaires dominate the pop charts, and not children of millionaires, Prince, Dylan, Aretha, Stevie, John Lennon, So I worry about that for young songwriters. And, at this point, I've got a bunch of tips and tricks. But the one thing that I know is, the best thing that they can do for their careers is to get really good.
My daughter said something to me yesterday. It was like she's 10 years old, and it was like it just dawned on her. And frankly, it's something that just dawned on me not long ago either. She said, it seems like as soon as you finish something, you start making another one.
Yeah.
And I said, and that's going to be the rest of my life.
How old is she?
10.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, God. What a beautiful thing. And how amazing to realize at 10, I got another one. I got better in me. Oh, the next one's going to be completely different.
I said to her, Exactly. I said, I think I'm four songs into another record. And she said, you just put out a record this year. And now you're making another one. I said, yeah, that's all we can do. Keep writing, keep going. You have to keep going. When it hit me, it wasn't that long ago. I thought, right. I mean, it's easy every now and then to get attached to a couple of them and think like, this is the one, this one's really special. This one, whatever, but they're all really special. And then you keep going and you keep climbing the hill. That's all you can do.
This is that great Martha Graham quote where she says, no artist is ever pleased. There's only a divine dissatisfaction, a blessed unrest that keeps us marching forward and makes us more alive than the others, or something to that effect. That's beautiful. And the other thing that you realize is that the more you write, the less precious you can be about each. And you can be like, oh, fuck, this one's going to be a bossa nova.
Yeah.
This one's going to be, I'm going to sing like Ralph Stanley on this one. I'm going to try this drum loop on this one. The next one's going to be acoustic guitar. This, of course, is not encouraged by the music industry. But what you begin to realize after a while, I think, is that the fundaments are the same. And they are the exact same fundaments that, Yip Harburg and Harold Arlen utilized, or Robert Johnson, whoever, you know what I mean? Taylor Swift or whoever is utilizing those same fundaments.
This gives us an opportunity to talk about some of the work that you've been doing right now. And I think you alone with your guitar are an extremely powerful song practitioner. I mean, what I've seen of you and heard of you alone with the guitar is really wonderful, and it doesn't need anything else. As a matter of fact, sometimes I feel like any more would be overkill. You sent me this record, God and the Girl, and you said this seems to be the record that a lot of people responded to, and you had some cuts off of it. People covered the songs, and also just something about that stark nakedness of those songs presented that way reached people. Feel free to interrupt me at any point.
I fell in love with you. I did not mean to. I fell in love with you by chance, by accident. First I loved your beauty, then I loved your brain, then you went insane. I fell in love anyway. And you were hard, but you were smart. And you were harsh as wilderness. And you were perfect, 'cause you were broken and lonely like me, aren't you? Lonely like me.
You then sent me a new tune, which you've done in a very contemporary trap, quasi-trap way. Trap, as a trap track, basically.
Analog, I miss the sound when the stars are underground, that everyone is famous now. Over and out. Analog, I miss the sound when the stars are underground, but everyone is famous now. Over and out.
It's almost as the argument, not that you need to make an argument with it, but there is a kind of argument to be made that, oh, right, well, trap isn't a problem. It's not good or bad inherently. It's just a vehicle to deliver this song. And here's a song that could have been rendered 100 ways, and you chose to do it in this way, maybe because it speaks to the subject matter of the song on some level, or maybe you just got interested in trap music. But I think that's an example of how the technology has no value, really. The technology is a vehicle. It's a conduit for you to graft your song onto or to interweave your song into.
God, I love technology. I feel like music is always at the forefront of technology. You know, at one point, the drum kit was new technology for, you know, King Oliver or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you think about the early days of recording, the invention and reinvention of microphones, like the early recordings, you know, where they mixed it by like who was closest to the microphone, right? So the singer is directly in front of the mic and the drummer's in the back of the room, and then it just goes by gradations from there. It's part of the reason why, you know, when we hear that really early recordings and we hear those tremulous voices, when I'm calling you, right? That tremolo, the vibrato on the singer, wiggled the needle to cut a deeper groove in the lacquer so that by the time the record was pressed, people could hear the words and melody better. Thus, more people bought those records. Records break. So over time, as a Smithsonian or Alan Lomax, or not Alan, but someone else is listening to these older records, there's just more of them in the world, thus more survive, you know, and that was pop. But then 10 years later, these amazing microphones come out, and then you get crooners, you know? The notion of like whoever could sing the loudest, you know, whoever could sing the loudest on the street corner or an opera singer or whatever, suddenly gives way to, you know, Billie Holiday, Bing Crosby, you know, and all these people that wound up influencing, you know, Sinatra, who influences, you know, Leonard Cohen or Nick Cave or whatever, you know. So like that technology, like, you know, I got one of the first drum machines, one of the first synthesizers. I remember specifically like playing some like what I'm sure was like an awful piano sound, and, you know, on some synth that I bought secondhand and being like, oh my God, I can play a piano on stage. And of course it sounded so rinky-dink or whatever, but at the time that was the jam. To your point about that song, you're talking about that song Analog, which is going to be on this new record that I'm putting out. I did make a specific move away from the very spare acoustic record that I made last time. And maybe that's a pattern that I'll continue, or maybe this will be like the last like full-blown-ish studio record. I don't know. But that song specifically has, the body of the song is an attempt to represent something very modern. And then the bridge just says, I miss the sound over and over again. And there's a bunch of analog echo on it. And I actually recorded it onto a piece of analog tape and then edited that into the digital file, and took great pains mastering it with Reuben Cohen at Larson Mastering to retain that thing so that there would be a shift and a representation of like this is not only about how quick you get your email or the fact that your new phone has 3 cameras on it or whatever. It's about an actual like guttural like movement of molecules that comes from older technologies. That is the difference between like a Doric column in Athens and one of those things that you buy in the sculpture yards in Jersey and put in the back of your yard as a bird bath. It's made out of plastic. So just making a comment on that. And I did it for 2 reasons. One is that felt really strongly about our shared cultural heritage and where that's going. And also, I think I was on Twitter at some point, probably jousting with a Spotify executive or maybe amplifying the voice of my colleague Blake Morgan, who's one of the preeminent artist rights advocates. He began I Respect Music, which is the biggest grassroots artist rights group. He's another guy that you should talk to. You should really talk to Blake. But I'm sitting there with my thumb poised over my phone and I'm like, why am I giving this away on the internet? I'm going to write a song about this
and give that away on the internet.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yes, that is the great irony.
When you were talking about the last handful of years and kind of what has happened to America and whether or not we can recover from this, it seems like you snapped into action and started writing a bunch of social justice songs under the Trump presidency. You got really motivated to call it out and to do it through songs. You sent me this song, Who Built the Wall?
Cannot see, but you know it's there. It's in the dirt, it's on the air, and there's a man above it all who built the wall. It stands between the first and last of us, between the future and the past of us, between casino and shopping mall. Who built the wall?
You sent me the song with the voices of the protesters at the Women's March.
This is what democracy looks like. Don't let him. This is what democracy looks like. Don't let him put the
You know, I could just see that you must have been kind of stewing in it and trying to find a way to use your voice. Did you feel an added responsibility or a sense of urgency under Trump to address it through songs?
You know, I do feel fairly lucky to have grown up at a time where music was still the rallying point for youth culture rather than the internet. I mean, when I first heard that story about how Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young watched Kent State, which is not too far away from where I grew up, and then wrote Ohio, went in the next day and tracked it. Track is fucking fire. Mm-hmm. And then they press it up and get it out to every station. Just never forgot that. And I will say that I was distressed that, you know, a fair amount of the left-leaning program directors and music directors on the groovy radio stations who have played my stuff for years were extremely reluctant to play those songs. They'll still play Ohio. But they were really reluctant to play those songs. And finally, one of them, I was like, come on now. And finally, one of them told me candidly, they're like, look, this is just too divisive for our audience. And I was like, dude, that's the whole fucking point. This is music, you know? If we're unable to find a place for lack of a better term, for a protest song, socio-political song, a timely song, we are sunk, my friend. We are sunk. Because songs do that thing that, you know, they better than any other art form. Songs do a thing where they get under your skin and you remember them. They echo in your head and they remind you a little bit about your humanity, or they change your focus, whether it's tipping well or giving some money to a person on the street who needs it. The song is the thing that sort of reminds you of your humanity in a way that a political speech or a think piece or a post is not going to do. And I'll add this. When the empire crumbles, all of them, that is what we go back to, right? It's the art, maybe the architecture, you know. It's, you know, we learn the history, but what we go back to, even in our own time, when we see, you know, these things, you know, when we watch Peter Jackson doing Get Back, or we see there's that amazing series, I really love this, 1971, The Year That Changed Everything. Nothing I didn't know, but it's put together in such a way where you're like, oh, wow, so, you know, this is a little before my time. What were they worried about in 1971? Racism, climate change, equal rights, rent control, corrupt presidency, you know. And what came out of those times? You got Mercy, Mercy Me.
Whoa, oh, mercy, mercy me. All things ain't what they used to be now. Where did all the blue skies go? Poison is the wind that blows from the north and south and east. Whoa, mercy.
You got Big Brother, Stevie Wonder, you know.
Your name is Big Brother. You say that you're tired of me protesting. Children dying every day. My name is nobody, but I can't wait to see your face inside my door.
And even the stuff that was fun from that time, it must be said, is like melodically arresting and contains some of the most innovative multi-track productions that we've ever heard.
So as you just said that you think maybe you're involved in a kind of a lifelong, you're not sure, pendulum of responding to whatever the thing that you did was and then doing the other thing and then doing, you know. In the meantime, though, you rack up these songs that either other people record or that, you know, live in the world for other reasons independent of your solo career as a singer-songwriter or whatever. I never watched the show Nashville, and I should have, because I know that it elevated songwriting on a popular level in a way that, you know, most people never have a chance to see. So I didn't know that your song Gun for Mouth was written for Nashville originally, and that was probably a really great thing for you when it showed up.
I found a girl and I gave her a ring. She was everything I'm looking for. It's over now, and this is how I lost the war. My head got heavy as a Christmas cake, and I made a break for the door. It starts so young, you choke your tongue. I lost the war, but you're not the only one with a gun for the mouth. No, you're not the only one.
Callie Curry, who created that show, was the writer of Thelma and Louise. So she also is using art as a way to make a statement in a way that it sort of like insinuates itself, and is also a lot of fun, you know. And for the first season, at least, T-Bone Burnett produced all the music for that and had his amazing band, which is a lot of folks, but, Jay Belrose and Zach Dawes. Jacob from the Punch Brothers plays on that track. Yeah, I wrote a bunch of them for that thing. And I thought that show at its heart, speaking of that Venn diagram of art and entertainment, I thought they were doing a cool thing there because, extremely populist nighttime drama, but about songwriters in a place known as being a haven for songwriters and innovation, but in a way that everyone could understand. And then they chose some really cool tunes for it. They did an Elvis Costello song, and they had some songwriting teams working on it. I thought that show was going to be like, and maybe should have been, sort of like the Monkees, where it's like, you watch the show on a Saturday night and everyone's like, I love that song. And then the single drops at midnight and then everyone's listening to it the next day. Maybe that'll never happen again.
Well, I interviewed years ago my friend Greg Holden, who used to live in my neighborhood, and he's a wonderful singer-songwriter, and he had this incredible thing happen where a random creative date that he went on that produced this one co-write ended up in a pile of songs that Jimmy Iovine was considering to have the winner of American Idol record, and they chose this song that Greg wrote called Home that Philip Phillips recorded like 10 years ago. And it became a massive success. And that was an example of, Philip Phillips wins the show. He goes out on Saturday night and sings it on stage. And Monday morning, they put it out as a single. And it was a huge hit. It was like one of the last examples I had seen of that, exactly the thing that you're talking about. You see it on TV on Saturday, it's on the radio on Monday.
Just know you're not alone, 'cause I'm gonna make this place your home. Settle down, it'll all be clear.
I love that. Like, if we're going to leverage the technology, let's use our powers for good. I mean, I will add, art is not a competition.
Yeah, no kidding, man.
This superimposition of sports culture on music is a horrible idea. The local talent show, I guess, is one thing. Maybe it's the same. But, putting together three talentless assholes to rip down or cheerlead in an insincere way these people who have pinned their hopes and dreams on one exact moment, often without a whole lot of experience, and moreover, to attach to that their entire life story, which is like, I mean, I get it, but like that medium is television. That is not a musical medium. Music is just an ancillary, it's the after dinner mint of that entire enterprise. I see that approach in music a lot, especially now that we're getting paid in like thumbs ups and hearts and stars. And so I think a lot of this kind of goes back to, and I thought about this when I heard your excellent interview with Dan and Claudia Zanes, and Dan was talking a bit about the national anthem, or someone pitched him to like sing the national anthem. And he was like, that's awesome. No, wait a minute. That's horrible. Why sing the national anthem at sporting events needs to be explained to me. But I suspect that it's because we want some kind of like a nationalistic and musical blessing for what is essentially going to be two tribes kicking the shit out of each other for the next 2 hours. We want to be exonerated from our guilt for that, especially with football. And then when I think about the national anthem, which in and of itself has been turned into a sort of competition, right? There's always that thing where, the singer is going to get to the high note and it's like, a white knuckle moment. Are they going to hit it? Is it going to be majestic? Are they going to exceed expectations? Is it going to be Beyonce or Roseanne Barr? So it's turned into a competition in that way. Or music becomes the halftime event. It's always this ancillary thing of like, well, we had a little bit of art while we were watching this celebration of stupidity. And when you get down to the song itself, extremely dubious provenance. There's a verse there about slaves, the history, and I've done a little research on this, and I haven't found conclusive evidence that Francis Scott Key came from a slaveholding family. There's some folks that suggest that the slaves he's referring to are not actual enslaved people from the time, but he's trying to, it's sort of the equivalent of calling other people knaves. I don't know the data well enough to take a stand on that, but it's in there, right? And even beyond that, the entire song is a glorification of war. It's bombs bursting in air. It's rockets' red glare. It's from a war that no one even remembers or remembers why we fought it. And when I hear that, I'm like, well, that's not the country that I want to reference in the national anthem. And so I'm just putting this out there. I think that we should change the national anthem to one of the great aspirational songs of all time, Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry.
Deep down in Louisiana, close to New Orleans, way back up in the woods among the evergreens, there stood a log cabin made of earth and wood, where lived a country boy named Johnny Be Good, who never ever learned to read or write so well, but he could play a guitar just like a ringing a bell. Go, go! Go, Johnny, go, go! Go, Johnny, go!
When I was in 7th grade, I wrote a paper on how a bill becomes a law, and my example was, how would we go about changing the national anthem to America the Beautiful, and specifically the Ray Charles version, if possible.
Oh, beautiful, far spacious skies, far amber waves of grain, far purple mountain majesties.
Martin Sexton does a beautiful version of that too.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. I just talked to him recently.
Yeah, no, I heard it. I know him from way back in the day too. A lot of the folks actually I know from being the sound guy at CB's Gallery, which was another formative piece of my adventure.
This is the piece that I said that we skipped over, and I know that we have to address it. In a normal situation, I would actually tag this in a way that I could insert it into our previous conversation. But frankly, given the way this is going,
I'm sorry. I've been too wide. I beg your pardon. I should talk less and listen more. And it's exactly what I said to myself before I began this thing. I was like, self, don't hate fun. Don't talk too much. And now, of course, I've spent the whole time hating fun and talking too much. I apologize, Leo.
This is life, man. This is what it is. This is a slice of life. But so you show up in New York. This is like, we're gonna, it takes an hour and a half to tell a 10-minute story. You show up in New York from the Midwest, and one of the things that you do is you become the sound man at CB's Gallery.
Yes.
And for 5 years, you are the dude behind the board, meanwhile writing songs, doing your own thing. That sounds like it's the time that now we all look back on as the glory days of the sort of Lower East Side, New York art, rock and roll songs. What did you find when you showed up here? What was that?
Well, I have to say, every day since then, and many before then, have been glorious. But my band had played at CB's Gallery, which is the performance space adjacent to CBGB, venerated rock club. Some would say birthplace of punk rock, American punk rock.
Yeah.
And this was the place next door that was an art gallery, jazz, avant-garde, performance art, singer-songwriters, indie rock, like that. Really fertile time for that place. CB's was established as the place to play. And this was not just the place to play before you got to CB's minor leagues. It was also like where a ton of amazing people played. Jeff Buckley, Chris Whitley, Vernon Reed launched his project After Living Color there. Soul Coughing got signed out of there. Lisa Loeb got signed out of there. Mark Rebo played there a lot. John Zorn's Masada. Lots of really amazing stuff from that period. And yeah, I walked in, and Liz Penta, who now manages Benesky, Barton and Wood, other folks of note, was running the joint. She had amazing purple hair, and thus I remembered her from when we had played there. She was like, "Oh, we're looking for a sound man. Do you know how to run sound?" And I was like, "Definitely." I was brand new to town and I needed a job. I had never really run sound, but guitar player, you get used to plugging things into stuff. I knew how to hook up a mic or whatever. Basically, the entire time that I was there, which was a long time, I worked that job until I got a record deal. It was usually like 4 or 5 bands a night. You made $5 a band. At the beginning. I think by the end, I was, it started off at $30 a night or whatever it was. And by the end, I think I was making like $75 a night. I was living in a 1-bedroom on the Avenue of the Americas, right around the corner from Electric Lady, with 5 other people, including 2 very loud musicians and a equally loud, fairly amorous couple. And I would go to the gallery every night and run sound. And it was an exciting time. The music was great. And also the people that worked there were all brilliant, creative, young people. A lot of really strong women. One was an artist, one was a photographer, one was a filmmaker. All of them went on to do amazing things. If the band was amazing, I would be inspired to run home and write a song. And if the band was horrible, I would be inspired to run home and write a song, really anything in between. And the other thing it turned me on to was just all of these different styles, which, coming from where I had come from, I just didn't know a lot about a whole bunch of different kinds of music. Mm-hmm. Moving to New York when I did really opened my mind. And then there were a few specific musicians. Chris Whitley was one that, I don't know if you're familiar with his music. He also has passed. I do him a disservice to nutshell him in this way, but maybe the missing link between like the Delta Blues and Joni Mitchell. A real poet who played slide and a bunch of nationals, but with these crazy open tunings that were far more like Hejira than Open E or Dadgad or something, and a poet's heart. Really beautiful voice, just a stunning performer.
Now when this is over and through, and all them changes have come and passed, I wanna meet you in the big sky country. I just wanna prove, mama, love can last, yeah. Like hallelujah in the big sky country. Just like forever and ever is why. Be getting over in the big sky country. Be kissing time, kissing time. Goodbye.
And, he had a big-ass record deal on big-ass record company. It was just, that was happening at the time,
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that it was a glorious time and very, very joyful period. Fairly difficult, but when you're, to paraphrase your dad, when you're young, you don't know better. You're like, I live in a 1-bedroom with 5 other people, and this is great. I'm in New York and this is great. I made $30 last night just for standing behind a board and listening to music. This is great.
So what were the victories? I mean, were those the victories, just knowing that you were in New York, that you were on some kind of scene, that you were part of it? I mean, what fueled you through the years of living with 5 other people in a 1-bedroom apartment, making 50, 60, okay, fine, $70 a night, running sound, And even though you were inspired, were you also thinking, when do I stop being the guy behind the board and be the guy that somebody else is mixing sound for?
Well, I was playing the entire time.
Yeah.
And we would go to open mics, and I became friendly with a lot of the guys, recent graduates from the new school, which at the time was creating these, really amazing players. Todd Horton, James Katz, Glenn Mauser, Matt Johnson, the drummer who wound up playing with Jeff Buckley, and who I've played with a lot over the years, and others. And the thing that I realized there was that it was two things. First of all, I would go to these open mics and cut session type things, and it became glaringly apparent to me in short order that I was never going to be the player that I thought I might have become, and that these guys were already running circles around me. It wasn't just the efficacy on the instrument. It was also that they were so passionate about the playing of the instrument. And frankly, it was a passion that I just did not have, and I still don't have. The playing of music, I love playing guitar and piano, but it's always been a vehicle for songwriting. So the other thing they taught me was that a lot of them were not writers. They definitely weren't, pop songwriters where it was vocals and lyrics and stuff like that. So consequently, I had these amazing bands of amazing cats, all of whom I'm still friends with, playing these songs that I made up. And, being in any new environment, whether you're traveling, whether you move to a new city, even if you just move to a new house, you're taking mental pictures of everything that is new, and it's just constant inspiration. And there are a few things more inspiring than New York in that period. It's a few years before 9/11. There was a lot of possibility. There were things happening there that just made up songs every day. And so that's where I realized that more than anything, even more than a singer or a recording artist or a aspiring producer, I was a songwriter.
Yeah.
That's what I loved. It was what I was best at. It came easily to me, which I think is something everyone should think about, especially musicians. Sometimes the thing that comes easiest to you that maybe doesn't to another person, sometimes that's your superpower. Sometimes that's, there are those things that you do better than most. Then there are those things where you're in the top 10% or whatever. And then there's that 1% thing, that thing that only you do or that only a few other people do. That's the superpower. And often it's something that is easy for you or that is a source of ongoing fascination. So you want to go back to that and you want to do those things. It is also, Leo, where I developed a certain process. And again, this is so pedestrian. It's one of those things that made me wonder why you called me, given the excellence and cultural significance of your other guests. But the two questions that I get asked most often by young writers is, first of all, how do you write a song?
Yes.
And second of all, how do you finish a song? So the early days in New York are where I developed my methodology for this. And I will tell you, because they're practical. How do you write a song? This is my method. I wake up, I get up. Try to smile, celebrate the oxygen. I immediately go and chug a pint of water. Because when you've been sleeping, you're dehydrated. The water actually wakes you up better than coffee.
Do you drink coffee too, or just water?
Then I make coffee. And then I go to the quietest place I can find. Over the years, it's been a rooftop, a closet, wherever, sometimes in the park. And I just write until I'm done. And I like to do it. I usually have an instrument close by. I like to do it with a pencil and a legal pad. These days, the biggest thing about it for me is that I do not engage with the screen until I'm done writing. That's a big thing for the now. Wasn't a problem in those days because they didn't exist, but I think that is a big deal. So when I'm at my most productive, that's my method. And
you write, and it's a daily practice?
yes. Yeah.
And is it a fresh idea every day, or are you refining? Do you finish in a day, or do you refine?
So that's the answer to the second question. And this one really bums people out, so I apologize in advance. But how do you finish a song? You finish the song. And I will say, doing so as quickly as possible is always in your best interest. And that's not to say that you're actually going to get 3 verses and a chorus exactly right. But if you can sketch it out, you know, and this, by the way, is the antidote to what people call writer's block, which, I don't know if that exists. Even when you're not inspired, you can work. And so if you have a bunch of things that you've sketched out in that morning, or the stuff that you write late at night before you go to bed, whatever it is, I like the morning. I do both. Sometimes it takes all day. But if you have something that you can work with, then when you don't have the fire of the idea, you can scrutinize it. You can edit. Writing is rewriting. I mean, there's a lot. How many times when you've been writing a song have you realized that, the third verse was the first verse? And then once you situate that, then you're like, oh, I have to write 2 more verses because the third verse is so exponentially better than the others. Mm-hmm. Or you realize that you've been working on a hook the entire time and the words are completely wrong. Or that your melody is completely monochromatic and you need to jump a sixth or go down a fourth, or it's too slow, or you need to change the key or whatever it is. Those are all the things you can do after you've captured the initial, idea. So that's where New York is where I started to do that, mostly because I just had to get away from my roommates.
Do you experience catharsis? Do you experience moments of surprise? Is it a channel that opens up and something flows through you and then you hear yourself say it? Or are you more analytical and more deliberate about the words that you're choosing and the way you want to structure your lyrics?
It depends on the song. And I will say that my rule with co-writing is that I don't ever write something that I wouldn't sing myself. And yet, when you're writing, and especially if you're in the room with someone, or if you've done some research for an artist, I always look at okay, what have they done to date? And then what have they not done? And sort of try to bring both of those things into the idea, And there's certain things that, starting with pronouns that are just going to change depending on who you're working with. I think sometimes in that, there is surprise. To me, the wonderment comes when the song is getting tracked. I'm often in the studio, or when, I get a copy of someone having covered one of the songs, or, if you've written one together and then they go off and record it with some producer and I hear that. Mm-hmm. When someone records a song that you wrote or that you wrote with them, it's just, the feeling to me is it's like when they deliver the birthday cake and everyone is singing to you. It's that kind of feeling of glee and almost like can't stand it. I'm doing Pina Bausch now with my fists, but the feeling of, almost embarrassment and glee simultaneously. There's no higher honor. That's where the joy, I think, where I feel it the most.
Yeah, that's I think an important point, and I suffered for a while or struggled with it, writing what you would sing yourself. I mean, it's funny because the question that was on the tip of my tongue when you said that was, do you have to believe it in order to write it?
I think so, yeah. But to that I would add, the song does not need to be true. The song need only be honest. Mm-hmm. And frankly, nothing is more boring than the truth. It's the objection I have to so much contemporary pop. Putting your diary entry to a drum loop and then having some like People magazine version of yourself that's supposed to inform the meaning for the people. Like that is fascinating to me, but in the way that speculative fiction is fascinating, you know, where it's like, oh, there's this entire mosaic of like a social media profile. And then we know who the person was dating because they are also famous. And so this song, which contains a voicemail or whatever, is informing this entire little soap opera that we have. Like that is a fascinating thing, but it's not exactly songwriting. That's masterful marketing. The song is an ancillary component that's the vehicle for their own celebrity. And I recognize that this is a thing now, but the gig is you put it on the page and hopefully you write a song that anyone can sing. And hopefully it's got a melody hooky enough that like when the cloud goes down and we're all sitting around the campfire playing our instruments from the 18th century made of wood and wire, or just singing a cappella, the melody is strong enough for everyone to remember it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Yeah, and I've thought about that a lot also. Like, does a song need to work on a 18th century instrument in order to be considered a song? Does a song, like, for example, because I live in this recording studio, I tend to, and I always have from the days of the Steve Miller demos, I tend to jump into the recording process after a song is at 60%, maybe 70%. I get so excited about what's happening that because my first instrument was the drums, I can't wait to cut the drums.
Yeah, right. Beautiful. I love that. I love that. How often do you wind up going into it at 60%, reviewing that recording, rewriting, and then either retracking or just retracking the vocal or reimagining pieces of the song and bringing them back into it?
All versions of it. I mean, I think that I have been guilty of being so attached to the recording that I forgive inadequacies in the song that I later on regret. And like for this last record, I made an effort not to do it at my house. I went to a friend's studio because I wanted to disrupt that process.
Yes.
And I wanted to get out of my way. And so I couldn't go there until the song was done. So I would walk in with essentially fully formed songs. Then it's just fun. Then you're just putting it down, you know?
Is that how you did the most recent full-length LP?
50-50. Half of that Art of Conversation is done at a friend's place and half is done here.
There are no
at my place.
compositional or lyrical inadequacies in that beautiful piece of art. There aren't. It's a stunning document. You sing great. The lyrics are all thoughtful. There's a playfulness to it. The musicianship on it is excellent. And the recordings themselves are sick. I mean, like, that's a very, very beautiful piece of work. That single, which was, to my view, just so generous. I thought it was one of the most successful songs that I heard come out of that time. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you this, like, everyone's been making their pandemic project, I think in some ways, the mental health of musicians, or this notion of like, wow, I don't have to go to all my friends' gigs. I don't get to go on tour. Mm-hmm. So we are broke. But if we've got an SM7 and a laptop in our house, then everyone's set about making a record. Awesome. I hope that most people are getting the message that as those records start to come out, it's probably a bad idea to be like, this is my pandemic record, because just no one wants to hear it.
I never overtly said anything about this being a pandemic record.
Right.
Later on, if anybody cares to look back on it and say, what were the conditions under which this music was written and created, that's great. But I didn't want it to be specifically a pandemic record. And maybe that's why I couldn't deal with the song that you're talking about, It's All Right, which is the most sort of pandemic response because of that. I wrote it on March 13th or something, right when we all got sent home. I was sitting home and wrote the song and didn't deal with it for over a year. I mean, I kind of pretended it didn't exist for at least a year. And then decided that maybe because we were still in it, I'm not sure why I was able to, reclaim it after enough time had gone by. But I actively avoided doing anything that would read as so on the nose because, maybe because of what you speak about. Like, I just worry that nobody wants to hear that. That's a hard sell.
The wind is whispering a message just from Mother Nature and from Father Time that we've got nowhere to go and no way to get there. So for now, we survive. And it might be slow, but don't forget that it's all right. It's all right. It's all right. It's all right.
And yet, you did that thing, like, it will be seen now in the way that everyone is seeing this because we have this ubiquitous event. But you've crafted a tune that is going to be, if and when the all clear signal happens.
Yeah.
That's a tune that you can play and you can put that in the set for the rest of your life. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it's about, and this is the thing that a lot of the great songs do. A lot of them are born out of struggle. Some of them are very specific. Ohio is specific. Mm-hmm. Mississippi, goddamn, is specific.
Well, that's just the trouble. Washing the windows. Picking the cotton. Nothing but rotten. Too damn lazy. Thinking's crazy. Where am I going? What am I doing? I don't know. Just try to do my very best. Stand up, be counted with all the rest. 'Cause everybody knows about Mississippi. Goddamn!
But they last beyond because, sadly, we have some of the same struggles, but also because they're just awesome.
Yeah.
They're just cool to listen to, and they express something. It's a dart to the heart, and they express something that is just part of the eternal struggle, my brother. So thank you for that.
Thank you, man. I'm allowing myself to receive it, even though I am a fan of yours and I admire what you do and I'm learning from you. And
same here.
I will allow myself to receive it. Can we write Don't Hate Fun? Did you write that song yet?
Dude, I just feel like you and I are going to write tunes and play gigs and do a bunch of shit together because you are lovely. And I, mutual admiration society, but yeah, let's do stuff.
There he was, my friends. Davie Poe, philosopher masquerading as songwriter. What a pleasure to connect. I don't know if you could feel the friendship forming between us. I'll be back in your headspace before you know it. Until then, I'll talk to you soon. And I'll leave you with this song that I dedicate to my new friend, Davie Poe. It's his song, New Friends.
No one knows my heart got broken away from home, so I start again.